Hi, and today we have with us Emmanuel, Legal Counsel for Voiceless, the Animal Protection Institute. And Emmanuel, so we want to talk to you about what is going on at the moment in Australia for the animals. It's a passion of mine to really raise awareness about a lot of the secrecy that goes on behind closed doors, and that's really what Voiceless is about. So can you tell us, how does Australia compare at the moment for the welfare standards of animals?
Yeah, so I mean, we can't necessarily say that Australia is doing the worst, but we're by no means the best. And we should and can be doing a hell of a lot more to protect animals. We still have 500 million animals in factory farms, so living lives of confinement and deprivation. We are still participating in the largest land-based slaughter of an animal on the planet, and that is the brutal commercial culling of kangaroos and their baby joeys. We still have a huge overconsumption of animal products. Australia is the largest consumer of meat in the world, which is remarkable. Recently, so only last year, Australia was ranked as part of the Global Animal Welfare Index. And so it was a ranking system of 50 countries across the world. And Australia was given a C. The countries that got an A were New Zealand, Austria, the United Kingdom, and it's clear to see, based on our record, why we were given a C. Countries have banned the battery cage for egg production, and yet we still have 13 million chickens confined in barren battery cages, no larger than an A4 size sheet of paper. Countries have banned sow stalls for pregnant pigs, and yet we still confine, these beautiful, intelligent, inquisitive creatures in these tiny crates, no larger than the pregnant pig's body. And there are countries that have recognised the sentience of animals, the inherent moral worth of animals, and they've recognised it in their legislation, some in their constitution, and we are so far away from that. So there is so much more that we can and should be doing for animals.
Is that Europe that has done that recognised the sentience?
Yes, so countries like the United Kingdom and Switzerland have recognised animal sentience in their legislation.
And can I ask, does that change the way they will then, have with farming practices? Does it change that?
At the very core of the problems with animals is their status as property. So we have a very human-centric view of the world. And I always say that law is a reflection of society. So humans, our relationship with animals is that they are merely there for our use, whether it's for our food, our cosmetics, our clothes, whether it's for scientific or medical research. They are objects and we commodify and use them. And the law reflects that, because at law, animals are merely property. They're things, they've got no rights, they've got no entitlements under the law. Any protections that they've got is actually to their owners, us humans. And those protections are so that people don't interfere with them. So recognising animals as sentient, living beings doesn't change their property status.
Right.
It doesn't change that inherent problem.
Yeah.
And so you'll continue to have animal exploitation and abuse so long as you maintain that legal fiction.
Right. So is that something that Voiceless works on? What are some of the issues that you guys are really core issues that you're working on?
So Voiceless is, for those that don't know, it's a not-for-profit think tank. Our focus is on raising awareness and reducing the suffering of animals in factory farms and in the commercial kangaroo industry. So we really see as our focus trying to educate the public about a lot of the cruelties that are inherent in factory farming, and lifting that veil of secrecy. I always say that animal use industries, they're huge profitable businesses, and they spend billions of dollars on creating this fiction that animal agriculture is what it used to be 50, 60, 70 years ago, of animals on lush green fields, on these picturesque landscapes where they're living these idyllic lives. It's just not the case.
Yeah.
The vast majority of animals, the faces behind your plate, they are living in sheds. They're living in artificial lighting and with artificial feed.
Yeah.
They're being mutilated. They're having their horns cut off. They're having their tails ripped off. They're having their teeth plucked out, all without pain relief. They're living in cages. They're having their young torn apart from them. This is the reality of our food. And so Voiceless is really about bringing to light those realities and working closely with politicians, decision makers, trying to educate them and also to obtain meaningful law reform for those animals.
So that is something that I know really, I volunteered at Voiceless for a year and was just in awe of the team behind, that you guys have. Everyone is a lawyer, a scientist, or just a general go-getter, but everyone is highly qualified.
Yeah.
And you guys really have the means to get people to listen to what is going on. And I know at all your events there's, highly regarded politicians, there are authors, there are, just decision makers. And do you think this plays a big part in bringing about change, getting these people to hear you?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest achievements that Voiceless has had over the last 10 years, and it's not just Voiceless, it's the animal protection movement as a whole, it's to drag animal rights as this dirty word that's on the fringe and it's only for radicals, to drag it out of there and make it a mainstream issue.
Yeah.
Now you have a look at the sale of, for instance, of eggs. The vast majority of consumers now purchase free range. You have a look at sow stalls and Coles and Woolies are recognising people are opposed to that.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to stock more humane produce. People are flocking to animal protection groups on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, or following them via EDMs or newsletters. The membership base is growing and it is becoming a mainstream movement, and that was what Voiceless was all about.
Yeah.
Trying to remove the stigma associated with caring for animals.
Yeah.
To think that compassion for animals was ever this ridiculous, radical concept, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's just a really simple principle that we shouldn't be oppressing another living sentient being for the benefit of humans. It's absurd.
Yes. Yeah.
And absolutely, getting politicians, getting some of the most logical, critical thinkers, like the former Justice of the High Court, Michael Kirby, to be speaking out on animal protection issues goes to show that it is becoming the next great social justice movement, and it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just ludicrous that it wouldn't change and evolve. And I think that's a really good point that you make about it's not just hippies. It's not just about the people who are bare feet running around. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with them either. Yeah. I thoroughly enjoy being that hippie with bare feet.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's just having compassion really for another being and not wanting them to suffer. It is unnecessary.
Yeah.
And this cruelty that is just inherent in our society behind closed doors really does need to be, told to the world so the conversation can be had, I think, which you guys are doing a great job of.
And it's part of that problem of rectifying or correcting clear social injustice. And coming from a legal background, it's one of the basic things that you're taught throughout university. It's the access to justice for individuals that are oppressed or suppressed. And history is littered with examples of where one group or society has been oppressed by another group of society for that group's benefit.
Yeah.
And we could think about, for instance, the subjugation of women or children or slaves. They are common examples. And the reasons why we were able to correct the situation and provide social justices for those individuals is because of a passionate and strong social justice movement that started from the grassroots and worked its way up.
Yeah.
And obviously changes in the law helped later when those when there was that support base.
And so you guys have a team of lawyers behind you. Is that something you work on, trying to change legal status and laws and codes of conduct around the way animals are used in Australia?
Yeah, well, we actually have just 2 lawyers, but we have a big impact.
Right.
We have a huge team of volunteers,
many
of them lawyers, barristers, students. We also have a legal advisory council, which sort of helps, and they are some of Australia's greatest academics and practicing lawyers who are assisting us in our efforts.
Right.
But also we have a team of communications experts and all the rest of it. So we are a small team, but we have a huge impact.
Yeah.
And I think that yes, part of our major focus is on growing animal law, because we do see the law as a driving force for change. And it all comes back to that property status of animals. If we are able to change what essentially keeps animals oppressed and in the current situation that they're in, and whether we do that through advocating with politicians or in assisting through drafting legislation or simply educating policymakers and decision makers, that'll go a huge way. But I think it always comes back down to raising consumer awareness. We need to create a groundswell of support from the general public, and for them to influence policymakers, for them to influence supermarkets, for them to influence producers. Ultimately, the key to success is going to be from individuals making humane and compassionate choices.
Yeah, yeah. And so you really think that that is the way change will happen, you know, from a huge consumer base change?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. You obviously need to show support amongst consumers and the general public, because otherwise politicians and supermarkets, etc., just won't listen. But at the same time, you need a really courageous, you need leadership, you need governance, and you need them to recognise that both the people won't stand up for that level of oppression or that level of cruelty, and for them also to be able to act. So it's a twofold process.
Yeah, and so it's obviously happening in other countries around the world. I just saw that New Zealand has banned sow stalls, and I know that there was a ban put in place in Australia a few years ago. But can you tell us a little bit what sow stalls are and what the current situation really is in Australia at the moment? Yeah,
so I suppose I could tell you the life of a pregnant pig, and she will initially be put into a mating stall where she will be artificially impregnated, and a mating stall is something that's no larger than the sow's, the pregnant pig's body. She'll be impregnated and then she'll be transferred to a sow stall. And again, this is a metal concrete crate where she'll spend the majority of her gestation period, so the majority of her pregnancy. And
which is about 12 weeks, am I right?
Yes, 105 days. So she'll no, I've forgotten.
Don't make my
12
maths.
weeks. Yeah. So it's, she won't be able to, so actually I do know, it's 3 months, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 days.
Right, there you go.
Very, very specific. So in these sow stalls, she's unable to take a step forward or back. She can't even turn around, and she's left in these crates for the entire duration of her pregnancy. When she is about to give birth, she's transferred to an even smaller cage, so a farrowing crate, where she can't even stand up. She will give birth in a farrowing crate, and her litter will be on the other side of the bars suckling off her. She'll never have time to be able to nurture them or have that exposure with her young. The piglets will be taken away from her. They'll be artificially weaned and they'll be thrown in a barn where they'll be fattened up. In that process, the piglets will have their teeth ripped out, their tails cut off. They'll be castrated, all without pain relief. And then the sow will be transferred from the farrowing crate back to a mating stall. She'll be re-impregnated and the cycle starts again. So that's the life of the typical sow, typical pregnant pig. In Tasmania and the ACT, we've seen at least partial bans. So in ACT, we've got a full ban on sow stalls, but there were no sow stalls. There were no big pig meat producers in the ACT. In Tasmania, there was a partial ban back in 2013, but still we don't have a national approach to banning sow stalls. Coles and Woolies have really led the charge, and they've made commitments to phasing out sow stalls. But there is still no national legally enforceable ban on their use. And we have seen, for instance, in the United Kingdom and in New Zealand, there has been that ban of sow stalls. So that's really what Voiceless wants to see. We want to see a ban on these cruel contraptions. The scientific consensus is overwhelming that these are bad news for sows. They are emotionally deprived. They experience what's called stereotypies, where they are so psychologically distraught by the process that they'll bang their heads up against the cages, or they'll bite at the cages. This is clearly distressing for them, and physiologically problematic. Sows develop lameness, an inability to actually stand. Not to mention the deprivation of not being able to nurture your young, or even go outside. So as a basis, we need to see these cruel contraptions banned. Yeah,
I mean, I've spent some time with pigs. I had no idea, being a city girl, that they were actually so lovable, and they're quite like dogs. That's what they reminded me of, big dogs. But you can scratch them and they will love that. They can roll over and they love a scratch on their belly, and they're really quite affectionate. And for me to think of my dogs to be put in cages like that and to not be able to move around, that just wouldn't happen. It would just be screamed cruelty from the roofs. And all animals have the ability to feel, but I really feel for pigs specifically, just because they really can reach out to you and communicate with you, and And what we are doing, like you say, is just diabolical, to keep an animal in that sort of confinement for such long periods over and over again.
Yeah.
You know, I really do hope that with your, you know, influence from Voiceless and just everyone standing up and going, how did this bacon get to my plate?
Yeah.
I will not buy from a producer that is supporting sow stalls.
Yeah.
It just will not. And you can do that as a consumer. You can find out.
That's
You
right.
it takes a phone call. It takes a
right.
little look on the internet. You know, you don't even have to eat pig meat. You know,
Yeah.
that's my preference, but I can't change everyone's opinion on that. But what I can do is just ask, do you really want to be part of this sort of, you know, inherent cruelty in this system when it is not necessary?
That's right.
Other countries are not doing it.
That's right. And it's funny that you mentioned the comparison between a dog and a pig. You know, the science shows pigs are smarter than, well, this is what some of them say, smarter than a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, they're highly intelligent, highly social, highly inquisitive animals, which makes their confinement just as bad. Science shows that they're just as, you know, in terms of cognitive abilities, they're on par with chimpanzees and dogs, you know. They're even considered Machiavellian when it comes to foraging situations. You know, they'll manipulate other pigs in their herd so that they can go and get food. You know, they're incredibly smart. And it makes confining them in that way just so much worse. But it does reduce down to that moral schizophrenia that we have. How you can love your dog, and I mean, I've got 2 fur children myself. And I always have in my family, long before I decided to look at these things more closely and about my lifestyle. And I could never imagine ever doing that to, you know, my dog or a cat. And yet somehow it's socially acceptable to do it for our food. And it is that moral schizophrenia, and it's also reflected in the law. You know, it's reflected in one of the basic laws is that you must exercise your animal except if they're livestock, which includes pigs. And it's a discrimination based on species.
Now, I always have faith in the human kind, despite all the destruction that's going on around the world. I really do. It might be some false way of survival, but I really have faith that we can make change. We've done it many times in history. We've overcome oppressive situations and rulings and made the right choices eventually. And, you know, I really do hope and believe that this is going to happen. It is happening for the animals around the world. You know, and it is possible. Do you see a possibility for a future that is kinder to animals?
Of course. I know that it's going to happen. You know, Voiceless's vision is of a world in which all animals are treated with respect and compassion. We see a world where there is no factory farming, where animals are not mutilated, you know, without pain relief, where humans question their overconsumption of animal products. And we do see that, you know, it is possible, it'll happen. But it's a slow process. Over the last 10 years, we've seen this boom in the animal protection space. It's remarkable. We've seen, you know, politicians becoming more sympathetic. We've seen celebrities recognising and adopting a more cruelty-free, you know, lifestyle. And it's only a matter of time. But I suppose, like all other social justice movements, they do take a long time. Ours is a cause that's a marathon, not a sprint. And whenever I feel as though our gains are just not coming fast enough, I always think about a quote from Martin Luther King when he said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And it's true.
It has to change if we're going to continue living in a beautiful world that we are, because you know, the UN's made it clear through their studies that animal agriculture is a big problem when it comes to greenhouse gases and destruction to the environment. And so we really have to choose a more compassionate way to live.
That's right. And I mean, also, I mean, if animal protection or compassion towards animals isn't something that motivates you, then maybe have a look at the environment. And as you said, the UN's report, Livestock's Long Shadow, livestock contributes 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. Global transport is only 13%. So it's a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. One of the biggest causes of death in this country is heart disease. And bowel cancer is also a significant threat. And we already see the link between red meat and processed meat and certain types of cancer. In fact, a recent report said that it equates it to smoking and asbestos
it got a lot of media press about that one.
And also something that many people don't realise, the overuse and misuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture. It's a huge problem. And the rise in superbugs, so antimicrobial resistant bacteria, which can be extremely hazardous to humans. So there are a variety of reasons, rationales, to look at the overconsumption of meat and overconsumption of animal products more generally.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is true. And we do obviously have to have a more optimistic outlook because it is our future and people need to start getting used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for all your work.